I am recording, just so everybody's aware, for anyone who couldn't join us this afternoon. And I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us and getting some more information and having some more discussion about the STAR initiative in South Dakota. So we're going to do our best to answer all of your questions. If you have questions as we go, please feel free to ask them. If it's something I'm going to address eventually, I might ask you to hang on to that question for a minute until we get there. But certainly, if you have a question or want some more information as we move through our agenda, don't hesitate to ask. So, oops. There we go. So here is our agenda. We're going to look at a couple of pieces of state reading data. We're going to look at an overview of the STAR training and specifically the hybrid model. Let me go back. Of the STAR training. We're going to talk about some of the keys to success and some lessons that we learned in the pilot phase of this new hybrid training, and then address any questions that you have remaining and talk about our next steps for STAR training. So John was kind enough to share with me some of our statewide data, and you can see at ABE level 3, this is for last program year, 488 participants at ABE level 3. If you remember, those are our students between grade equivalents 4.0 and 5.9. Those students who were participants for us last year had an average of 65.6 hours, and we had just under 34% who attained a measurable skill gain. And then ABE level 4, we had 483 participants statewide. And remember that ABE level 4 goes from grade equivalent 6.0 all the way up to 8.9. That's the huge one. Those students had an average of 59 hours and about 41% attained a measurable skill gain. And I was looking at these data and thinking about how many students that leaves who are not progressing out of these levels and how that limits their prospects, specifically in the workforce, because we've got such a workforce focus now. You know, adults reading below the 9th grade level have so many obstacles to success. When you just think about the workplace documents that they might encounter on the job, and accessing that kind of information can be such a challenge. I know several years ago, and I think I've shared this multiple times, so you probably all have heard this story before, but several years ago, I was asked to do a readability check on the South Dakota driver's license manual. And the driver's license manual for our state is written above a 9th grade level. So I feel pretty passionately that we owe our students the best, most effective, most efficient reading instruction that we can possibly give them. And even those students who might be at these intermediate levels in math or who are looking to come to our programs for assistance in math, I would argue that with the 2014 GED test, and now certainly with the TABE 11 and 12 assessments and the changes that they've made there, those tests require a level of reading that would prevent our students with level 3 and 4 reading skills from being successful. So I think that those reading skills can only help our students in all areas of their academic and workplace careers. So,
Becky,
yes,
if I could interject on that
certainly.
previous slide, I just think it's worth noting or considering that ABE level 4 measurable skill gain percentage at 41.1% is relatively, comparatively extraordinary.
Yeah.
We have to go back all the way to Marcia Hess's tenure, program year 8-9, to find a level equivalent to that. I mean, from 2009 onward, I mean, we ranged from 25%, 31%, 33%. The closest was 37 back in program year 10. So 41%, really remarkable. Thanks.
Very good. Thanks, John. So one of the ways Octave has given us to intervene with these reading students is STAR. And it's ongoing professional development. It's not a curriculum. It's professional development to help all of us implement evidence-based reading instruction, or EBRI. All of the techniques that STAR delivers to participants are evidence-based. Most adult education teachers don't have degrees in reading, and if they do, their degree probably isn't specialized to adult learners. But when our teachers finish STAR training, they will be able to say with confidence that they know the most effective ways to teach reading to those intermediate level adult readers. And that focus is on those intermediate levels because they are the biggest group of learners, both in our state and nationwide, and because they have needs that are so complex. And I know that this is kind of preaching to the choir to all of you, but we know what to do with our beginning level readers, right? They need some phonics help. They need to become more fluent readers. We also know how to work with our advanced readers. We need to work on that high level content vocabulary, and we need to work on comprehension strategies with them. But as we know from looking at the research on this intermediate level group, their needs vary so much. And that's one of the reasons why they as a whole have not been successful in moving forward, and why we have not been as successful as educators in moving them forward to the point where we're talking about that 41% success rate being extraordinary. It is extraordinary, but I would love to change that conversation so that in South Dakota we were talking about more than 50% of those learners at those levels being able to advance. And because the project focuses on intermediate level readers, it's important that any teachers participating are actually working with intermediate level readers throughout the training. And it sounds silly to say this, but we've actually had a lot of instances over the years where we've got teachers who say, well, but I teach math classes, and they're still enrolled in STAR training. We don't want that to happen. If you've got somebody whose primary assignment is teaching math, don't include them in your STAR training cohort. One of the reasons we ask that people currently be teaching reading to these groups of learners is that they're going to have practice assignments in the modules where they'll be asked to go back into their classrooms and try out some of the things that they're learning with their learners. So, and again, I think this just, it always bears repeating. STAR meets the requirements outlined in WIOA Section 223 that says that states are required to address those essential components of reading with our students. And the other thing that I had kind of forgotten about, but I actually was looking for something else and pulled something out of a folder and found my copy of the State Unified Plan for Title II. And STAR is actually part of South Dakota's Unified State Plan. On page 89, it says that South Dakota leadership monies will support funding for evidence-based reading instruction, and specifically calls out STAR, which I think is nice and is interesting to me. So I don't know why I had forgotten that, but I had. And the other thing that I think bears some thought is that STAR really represents one of the highest standards of high quality professional development. And this is another thing that was legislated through WIOA. And the legislation actually called out features of effective professional development. And this table, and I know it's a lot of text, and we're not going to read it all to you, but I do have a document that if you're wanting to look at this a little bit more closely, I can share with you. But it calls out some of the things that STAR actually features that are part of that effective professional development model. You've got a specific curriculum content area that you're focusing on in reading. Participants are able to go back into their classrooms and try out the techniques that they're learning as they work through the modules. There's a huge collaborative piece, not just for participants within their own programs, but for the entire cohort of learners across the state. There's a lot of videos and sample lesson plans to help learners along. We've got certified trainers, and we're going to do coach training to help coaches learn how to support the teachers in this program as we go through. And then there's always a ton of feedback as learners work through the independent work as well as their classroom work and their team meetings. In South Dakota, we've got this training scheduled to take place over about 8.5 or 9 months. So we know that it's going to be learning over time. This isn't a one and done. And Kim, did you want to say something more about that as well?
I'm not sure where you were going as far as.
Oh, just that we're not looking at this as a one and done training opportunity.
Oh, well, and that we'll look at it again in the future. Is that
right.
what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and probably in. I think we have it to look at again in 21 or 22 would be it.
Okay. But the other thing to keep in mind is that when this particular training cycle is done, that doesn't mean that that's an end to the support that you can receive from the PD team in terms of your reading classrooms and providing reading training. We're not going to repeat the entire initiative again next year. For one thing, we probably wouldn't have as many teachers as we would need to build a logical cohort. But there's always support from the PD team, and we can look at different ways that we can support programs and teachers on an ongoing basis as well. So when we think about the relationship of STAR and how it fits into our state and how it fits into our programs like college and career readiness standards or career pathways, one helpful analogy that the STAR lead researcher Mary Beth Curtis and OCTA's Chris Coro have used recently is to think in terms of planning a trip. And on this journey, college and career readiness standards, high school equivalency, career pathways are the destinations where our students want to arrive. That's where they're going. We're the place where they're starting. We're their pin on the GPS where they're starting out. The standards describe where we want our students to end up. Our instruction is the vehicle for them to get there. But there are so many different roads to take that it's easy for our students and even for us to get lost along the way. So STAR and evidence-based reading instruction are like our instructional GPS for reading. They show us a clear instructional path for each of those intermediate level reading students that will help them get to that final destination as quickly and painlessly as possible. We talked a little bit about this when we were together in Peer. The STAR content was recently reworked in order to incorporate distance learning strategies into what we're now referring to as the STAR hybrid training model. You all remember the old STAR model. It was 6 face-to-face training days where instructors learned a concept and then integrated lessons learned into their programs. Each of those trainings was led in person by a STAR trainer and integrated the usage of an online STAR toolkit. The new hybrid model has been redesigned to help all of the states who are interested in providing STAR to adopt evidence-based reading instruction in their programs a little more easily. The new package consists of 30 interactive online learning modules that provide instruction and practice, and then 2 face-to-face meetings for problem solving and skill verification. During the online modules, you get the content. You get the explanations of new techniques. You get modeling from instructional videos produced from actual classroom experiences. And then participants are guided through that online practice, which is followed by assignments, where the participants try out those new techniques with their students and share their results and reflections in an online portfolio. The training uses a flipped classroom approach, where after those participants have accessed the interactive lessons using audio and video, face-to-face sessions are used to work through the challenges that participants are encountering in implementation. One of the things that I really like about the flipped classroom is that it gives participants an opportunity to work through the content at their own pace and to practice the skills that they're learning in their classrooms as they go through the training. In the past, we'd do those full 2 days of training that were just crammed full of information. And then we'd go back to our programs and try to remember what we learned in those 2 days and try to remember how we were supposed to do it and how we were supposed to incorporate it into our programs. Now, participants have the opportunity to work through a learning module and then to go right into their classrooms maybe the next day, the next week, and incorporate what they're learning into practice more easily and more readily. In the flipped classroom, the face-to-face sessions aren't used to present content. They're not a cram session, but they're really designed to work through the challenges that participants are having with the content and to help them work on those implementation issues, making changes to the way they conduct their classrooms, to the way they structure their programs. And because the face-to-face trainings offer that deeper dive into implementation, that's especially important that the entire STAR team from each program can attend those sessions, because we're really asking the programs to work together as a team to really dig into some of the issues that they're facing with implementation, and at the same time to share with their colleagues from around the state what those challenges are that they're facing and any solutions that they're working on implementing in their own programs. Any questions about the training delivery? Okay, I wanted to share some statistics that we have from the STAR pilot. The STAR project team was really very pleased with the overall results of the pilot. That pilot took place last year, last fiscal year, and educators from 5 states took part. Those states were Illinois, Massachusetts, Arizona, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Both Illinois and Massachusetts were states with certified STAR trainers who had delivered the original 6-day face-to-face model. And then 2 pilot trainers came from Illinois and 4 were from Massachusetts. Arizona, New Hampshire, and Vermont were states that were new to STAR. New Hampshire and Vermont joined together as a cohort for the pilot test. So they were working together. They're right next door. I think they take up less geographic area together than South Dakota does just by itself. So it worked well. They were close. And 2 certified trainers from the hybrid package development team delivered the training to Arizona and to New Hampshire and Vermont. Across those 5 states, 123 educators completed a pre-training survey before the training began. Of those 123, 92 began training by completing the first individual assignment. And you might ask, well, what happened to those other people? They realized after that pre-training survey, hey, I don't think that I'm the right person to be in this training. Some of them were, but I only teach math. Well, yeah, it's a training for reading instructors. Some of them realized that they didn't teach the right level of reading. Some of them had personal issues that required them to leave the training. So, all the reasons that we know that people start something and can't finish it realistically, that's what happened to those folks that dropped out between the pre-survey and the beginning of training. At the end of the pilot, 66 participants had completed the training, which was a retention rate of 72%, which for online-based training is fairly remarkable. Generally, those stats look more like our MSG completion rates. They're generally less than 50% completion for an online training. Of the people completing the training, 70% of them were teachers, 20% were administrators, and 3% were professional developers. About 1/3 of those people had never taken an online training before. So that was kind of interesting as well. And among the people who completed the pre-pilot survey, but who aren't counted as completers, there were 14 administrators who worked with their teachers during the training and accessed the online modules, attended the face-to-face sessions, but didn't do all of the assignments. Technically, they weren't counted as completers for the purposes of the pilot and the data compilation that they did. They called them auditors, I think was the term that they used. So, more results from the survey here. Changes in knowledge and beliefs about reading were assessed pre and post training through a web-based survey using yes, no, true, false, multiple choice items derived largely from the set of the polling items that were used during the 6-day face-to-face training. Of those 66 participants who completed the training, responses from 54 were available to analyze knowledge and beliefs about reading. The others, the results came in after we had to stop for the data collection for compilation. compared to the pre-training survey responses where participants chose 48% of the responses consistently. They got 48% correct. 80% of the responses were consistent with content after the training. So that was a pretty good jump in knowledge and beliefs. And then this is one of my favorite ones because it tells me that people are actually using what they learned. The pre-training survey was also used to assess both pre and post participants' familiarity with and frequency of use of some of the instructional practices that are featured in the training. Prior to the training, many participants reported never having heard about or ever trying about half the practices covered in the training. And by the end, nearly every participant reported being familiar with every practice, and many said they had begun to use them on a regular basis. So I thought that one was a great stat. And then finally, just a few mentions of participant satisfaction, because that's always something when you're doing a long, difficult, involved training like this, you're interested in. So whether the training met people's expectations. 89% agreed or strongly agreed that the training provided them with sufficient opportunities to apply what they were learning. About 85% strongly agreed that the training activities, both online and face-to-face, were engaging and helpful in learning the content. 84% said they were satisfied or very satisfied with the training. And 74% agreed or strongly agreed that their time, both in the online and face-to-face portions of the training, was used effectively and efficiently, which again, I think is important when you're taking on a big project like this. Any questions about the pilot results or anything to do with the pilot?
Was, to your knowledge, Octay given a report or debrief on the pilot at some point or throughout the course of the pilot?
They were given updates throughout the course of the pilot, and at the end of the pilot, they received a full written report containing all of the results, some of which I've shared with you here today. I have a copy.
Is Rana Spicone the, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Is Rana Spicone the point of contact with Octay for this?
No, Katie Chase is the core. She's fairly new in that role within a couple of years. So yeah, that's the first line point of contact. I believe I have a copy of the report that went to Octay. I'm not sure I'm supposed to share it, but I can ask.
Understood.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that one's gone out for public dissemination yet. I know that they were planning on sharing those pilot results. I'm not sure if it's been finalized yet. That's my only reservation there. It's not like it's a secret, but just to make sure that I've got the complete finalized copy is my main concern. So, okay. So the research tells us that the needs of intermediate level readers are varied. So when we're working with students, we have to know how to do diagnostic assessment in the 4 components of reading. And that's one of the things that the STAR project teaches our participants. We want to find out which components are strengths for each learners and which components are instructional priorities. You also learn then during the training how to look at the results of those assessments and identify which components are instructional priorities. And for those components, you'll learn to identify the level of text that's going to be challenging for students. Then you'll learn how to group students according to the components and levels of text they need to work on and plan an instructional routine to incorporate all of your groups for that classroom instruction. So that's a really quick thumbnail of what STAR training teaches our participants. Implementation, I think, is a bigger bite even than learning the content. Implementing instructional routines that teachers are going to develop for learners in their classrooms is likely going to require some changes in how we address instruction in our programs and classrooms. So there are considerations here that go beyond what a classroom teacher can address on their own. There's finding time and space to do that diagnostic assessment because they are one-on-one assessments. and they do take time, like all assessments do. There's considerations for planning time for teachers. Who's going to do that planning? How are we going to address it? When is that going to be done? And especially when you're first getting started in implementing something this large, it can take more planning time than it does later on. You know as well as I do, when something is new, it takes us longer. We have more questions. We get a little more bogged down in it. So it can be a challenge at the beginning to figure out how we're going to work in that planning time for teachers. So part of the training is your program team working together to identify what these implementation issues might be for your specific program and how you might address them. As a trainer, it's my role to help facilitate finding those solutions. And the state leadership is also there to kind of help you navigate changes and address state level issues that can arise from these kinds of questions. So this is one of the reasons that it's so critical to have administrative level support throughout all aspects of the training. Even though administrators aren't necessarily the ones who are going to be doing the diagnostic assessments or teaching the lessons in the classroom, it's important that they have a very good working knowledge of what it means to do those diagnostic assessments, of how an evidence-based reading classroom looks different from the classroom that you might have going now in your program. And the research on implementation is very clear that without strong leadership, implementation doesn't happen. Another thing to think about is that training on this scale requires a commitment of time and money. The state's making that commitment and bringing the training to our programs. Your programs are making that commitment by choosing to send people to the training. You don't want to invest that kind of time and money to only come away with a couple of good teaching techniques that people might fit in here and there in their classrooms. Full implementation is a lot more than that. And full implementation can make a huge impact on your students' progress and their ability to function at that post-secondary level and in the workplace on a much higher, more productive level. Any questions about any of that? Or comments?
We do understand, I want to make sure everybody knows that we do understand that some program sites are going to be very small, and trying to figure out how to overcome that. You know, but if the same person does the testing who makes the decisions about space, that covers everything as far as that program leader.
Right. I've been doing classroom observations. I'm working on my wait time. I like this graphic because I think it just underscores how difficult and multifaceted actual implementation of change is. This graphic comes from the National Implementation Research Network, NERN, and they identified and synthesized the evidence base on implementation. And this is implementation of any kind of change, not just academic change. From their research, NERN identified 3 types of implementation drivers. They're competency drivers, organization drivers, and leadership drivers. And each is critical in the implementation of any change, but certainly in evidence-based reading instruction implementation as well. So there are 4 drivers that NERN identified that deal with developing competence for an innovation. And in this case, we're talking about reading, right? Staff selection, training, coaching, and staff performance assessment. Effective implementation begins with picking the right people who have the qualifications and experience, but also those people who are open to thinking about changing the way that they're doing things. Effective STAR training should include demonstration of evidence-based techniques and opportunities to practice new techniques with feedback. Hopefully we're addressing that. Coaching is essential because you need to be practicing on the job, and having support while you're doing that practice is very, very important. So that's why coaching is part of STAR training now, and why we've got some coaching training for administrators within the training as well. And then that performance assessment, that's why we're still doing pre and post surveys when we do these trainings. All of our participants are going to get that pre-training survey and then a post-training survey to ensure that we're meeting the standards for effective training. Those organization drivers are things like the data support systems. I know John talked about LACES. And maybe some ways that we can track some performance within LACES as well. Facilitative administration, systems intervention. Facilitative administration, I think, is really looking at reducing those implementation barriers by ensuring that policies and procedures and structures are all aligned to help make that change. And then the systems intervention also are strategies for leaders and staff to work with external systems. For example, the state leadership to ensure availability of the resources needed to that are required to support this work. And then the leadership drivers, there's two of those. Adaptive leadership champions change by securing buy-in from key stakeholders, whether that's your teachers or partner agencies or anyone else who needs to be on board to support this kind of change. And then technical leadership is needed to manage continuing implementation supports on an ongoing basis. NERN's research is clear that good training isn't enough to implement any kind of change. So we need to think through the work that we need to do as leaders in our programs to work through each stage of implementation and to think about where we want our programs to go with reading instruction.
Question, comment? Becky?
Yes?
Oh, sorry. So you had mentioned LACES, and I know in the past we've had a drop-down menu under secondary program type, and
Right.
we've used keyword, and other agencies use keyword 1 and keyword 2 for satellites and local designations. But I think we should have that conversation, and by the next LACES webinar, have some consistent means that we want to track these new STAR 2.0 student participants, so we can look at the data in a disaggregated format that's consistent across all LEAs. Thank you for making that mention. So.
Yeah, I agree, John. I think that anytime that you're trying to make a change like this, it's so helpful to be able to access data to show the impact that it's having. I know that that's something that we look for all the time in our own program, and we look for different ways to gather that data, to organize it, to pull it out for analysis as well. So I agree with you. I think that that's very important, and I would think that programs would want to have that data at their fingertips as well, and LACES is a perfect place to do it. And they've been very easy to work with in the past, and I'm sure they can help us think of some practical solutions to how to do that. All right. So this is a rough training overview for us. When we are actually closer to starting training and we know who our participant group is going to be, all the participants are going to be receiving a detailed syllabus that identifies a timeline for working through the modules. This timeline is a suggested timeline. We've had people through these trainings, as we've gone through the pilot, and now as we're working with post-pilot states in this hybrid model, we've got some people who, they'll have a stretch of time where they obviously have more time to work through these modules, and they'll get 3 or 4 done in a row, and then submit all their work, and then there will be a period where there's a little bit of a slowdown for them because they're ahead of schedule. I've actually got people in one of the cohorts I'm working with right now, their deadline for completing a set of modules isn't until December 14th. They're almost done now before Thanksgiving. And I'm sure what they're thinking is the holidays are coming. I don't want to be messing around with this over Thanksgiving, moving into Christmas. I want to get this work done now, work with my students, get my assignments submitted and be done. So there's guidelines there on the syllabus for deadlines, but people are able to move through as slowly or as quickly as they need to, as long as they have the work done and are ready for the face-to-face meeting that is scheduled. So you can see section 1 of the training deals with an overview of evidence-based reading instruction. It details some of the research that the training is based on. So if there's anybody out there who's just wildly interested in reading the reading research, we've got some resources in the modules for that. And then it goes through conducting diagnostic assessment in each of the 4 reading components. So section 1 ends with a face-to-face meeting, the first face-to-face meeting, and then you do a program meeting to kind of assess where are we at, what have we learned so far, are we running into any issues or problems or barriers, what do we need to do to address those. Section 2 then is April through June, and that focuses on the evidence-based instructional techniques. Those techniques are all very applicable to our classrooms. Some of them will be familiar to people who've been through STAR training before. Some of them are new and improved. And then people are going back into their classrooms and trying those techniques out. And then section 3 is July through September. And that's really creating an instructional routine and next steps. And I know that some programs don't have a lot of students in those summer months, but honestly, it's not going to be a huge barrier, because what you're going to be doing at that point is working on really how you're going to structure your program to put those classes into place and to make them work. And then going through and implementing some of those techniques with students that you have, and doing that coaching piece and getting feedback on how the instructors are doing in the classroom. Within the modules, there's an online program portfolio, and that's where all of the assignments are recorded for each participant. The program group has access to everybody's work in their program in that portfolio. So if Carla and Stephanie and I were a program group and I submitted an assignment, Stephanie and Carla could go in, review what I submitted, and make comments on it or ask questions about what I did, because we want to create that collaborative learning even if people aren't necessarily in the same place. In Black Hills, in Lake area, at Cornerstones, we all have teachers who are in separate communities from us. So we still want to give people the opportunity to be able to share that learning experience in the same way you do when you're sitting in a classroom together, but to be able to review what people are working on, give feedback, make comments, ask questions. The trainer also has access to those program portfolios and is able to go in and provide feedback and ask questions and make suggestions. There's also an online discussion forum where everybody within the state training cohort can discuss and ask questions and provide suggestions and share experiences with their fellow practitioners as we're going through the training. I think that it's a good way to create that network of learners, that community of learners that we know enhances and enriches every learning experience that we have. We can't be together face to face on a weekly basis, but within that discussion forum, we can still have what really can be very rich and productive conversations about what's happening through the training and what we're experiencing in our classrooms as we go into the classroom and try out the techniques that we're learning.
Becky?
Yes.
This is Floria.
Yep.
Just clarification for me, if you will. I hear the different terms, trainer and coach,
Right.
and I'm a little bit confused. I'm I'm assuming that your role is that of the trainer, but can you better define the role of a coach?
You are just leading me right into my next slide. It's like you're a plant. Um, yes, I will definitely do that for you. So here are some of the keys to success that we've learned from STAR training in this model. As we mentioned before, leadership is one of the drivers of successful implementation. I think we've probably talked enough about that one. And the research on change also identifies a culture of being open to new ideas and new learning and a willingness to change as a critical factor in implementing anything new. As an instructional leader, you can help set this tone, but we also know that we all work with people for whom change is an easier thing and people for whom change is far more difficult. And sometimes the path of least resistance is okay. You know, if you've got an instructor who just really has a hard time with change until they see it working in front of them, they might not be the person to send to the training. But once they see it working in their program with someone else, they might be more open to trying it. So to keep that in the back of your mind as you think about choosing participants. For administrators specifically, involvement in completing the modules and commenting on the work that teachers do helps to motivate everyone to work towards implementation. But administrators do not have to complete every single assignment. There are alternate data sets that you can use if you're not working with actual students, but you also don't have to do those assignments with the alternate data sets. If that's not a meaningful activity for you as an administrator, that's okay. We still want you to go in and access the content so that you've got a good idea what your teachers are learning and what they're trying to implement, but you don't have to do the work on the assignments as the administrator. And then we talk about the coach. The research also indicates that the support of a coach is a key driver to successful implementation. And yes, Gloria, you're right. I am the trainer. And then the coaches are people who are identified in each program. Or as Kim mentioned, if you've got a small program and you want to share that coach feature with another program, you certainly can. The coaches are people within a program who have been identified to mentor the teachers as they go into their classrooms. And it seems that program administrators are a logical fit to act as those coaches. The coaches are really there to support the trainers in implementation questions that they've identified in the classrooms, to go in and observe the teachers at work, and then to provide them feedback that can help strengthen their classroom practices. There is a coach training module that's specifically for the people who are identified to be the coaches for each program. That comes in section 3. And it's, I think, a pretty good outline of what the expectations are of a coach. But it's going in and doing classroom observations and then providing feedback to the teacher. And there is a form in that online portfolio where the coach then posts that feedback to the teacher so that they can see it. Does that answer your question, Gloria?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I also want to mention that when this training was developed, we thought very hard about the role of administrators, and we really wanted to incorporate information for administrators throughout the training as well. So there are specific pieces that are very administrator driven. Those program team meetings are a good example of that. You do some work and you come together to talk about how it's going, how it's working, what's not working, some of the reasons why it maybe isn't working, and any ways that you can come up with to deal with that. The trainer does not have to be involved in those program meetings, but I can certainly be available if there is an issue that you know is coming up that's really confounding everybody in your program and you want some additional input on it. So I do think that there is value for administrators in attending the training as well. That brings us to questions. Steph, thank you. I did see your comments. I do not believe that there's any face-to-face anything scheduled in August. So I think you're clear.
The last face-to-face would be in July, actually.
Yeah, so there wouldn't be anything that your team would have to work around, or that couldn't work around during that first couple of weeks in August that you would need to be free for your.
It's just kind of a rough time to try to roll out any other piece of. It's not that it's a. I think in September we'll have a lot more flexibility, but July and August are going to be hard for us to squeeze anything else in.
Right.
And I think that's why we extended the deadline to actually mid-October, just because we knew September. It wasn't until after Labor Day that we could really start hitting it hard at the end.
Right. So yeah, we're looking at rolling through September, and honestly, there is no hard stop. I mean, at some point we'll say, okay, so we want you to all be done by this point. So, my training time will kind of end, but everybody has access to all of the training materials, to the entire portfolio, to the discussion forum beyond the end of the training. So it's not like there's going to be a point where all of a sudden everything goes black and you don't have access to it anymore. So, if you still had one more module to do or something, you're just going to be out of luck. That's not the case at all. At some point, I do, as the trainer, have to tell the powers that be at Manhattan Strategy that you're all considered completers now. And they roll you into essentially a completers discussion forum where then you can interact with other states who have implemented STAR and have gone through the training, which I think is pretty cool. But you still have access to all of your own program information and all of the online modules at that time. Any other questions?
Yes, please. This is Gloria.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I'm kind of struggling with in my mind is that the individuals have to be reading teachers. And I'm just thinking that particularly in our smaller sites, and I would imagine this is pretty common throughout the state, a teacher is teaching all of the subject.
Right.
So do I understand you to say that have a teacher that is specifically teaching math, they would most likely not be appropriate for the training?
If they are only teaching math, they would not be appropriate for the training. If they're one of your teachers who's teaching everything and they've got intermediate level learners that they're teaching it to, then certainly. It's just that, we want them to have some of those intermediate level readers to be working with while they're in the training. So yeah, it doesn't mean that they have to be teaching only reading. It just means that reading has to be one of the things that they're teaching.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And yeah, those single teachers, they are the program. We have a lot of those in the state. And one of the things that I would love to see is that some of those teachers would be discussing in that discussion forum, okay, so how are other people making this work in this situation? Because I think that we think of it as a really unique thing. I was one of the trainers for Vermont and New Hampshire. Almost everybody there is like, I am my program site. So, there were challenges there that I had seen before from training in South Dakota and from some other places. And of course, we all always think we're unique. They said, well, you've never seen anything like this before. And I said, oh, tell me I haven't. We've got those sites in South Dakota. Any other questions?
Becky, I was curious, might we be able to get this PowerPoint?
Oh, certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, I will send that to you. Definitely.
Couple things to clarify. The basic materials for getting started with this and the travel expenses for the two face-to-faces, well, actually just for the other one's under Summer Summit, is covered within the state's project money.
Yeah, and I'll flip this up as well. Oh, and as soon as I said there's nothing the first week in August, that coach's webinar is August 2nd. If we need to shift that one way or the other, we can, though, certainly, to accommodate Rapid City. I don't want to get in the way of Minds That Move Us. That's too important to all of us to get in the way of that. So, that could shift to the end of July, or it could go later in the month of August, certainly, because we just want to be able to get the coaches ready and set to go before the time that anybody would be out there and moving. I would actually prefer to, I guess, to move it up a week rather than back a couple of weeks if we need to. Again, the training registrations, we would like to have those in by December 14th, and I included the link here. That's in the handout that Kim gave you when we were in Peer, and it's also up on the South Dakota All website, correct, Kim?
Yes, if you go to the professional development page, there's a link to all the materials there, and there will be a link to this webinar there.
The kickoff webinar then is tentatively scheduled for March 1st, 2019 at 2:30 Central Time. Again, once we've got our training cohort set, if there are issues with those things, we can discuss, moving them a little bit. We don't want to get too far away from those dates, but if we need to look at times, days, those kinds of things, we can.
And we did move them. They were originally looking at Thursdays, right? We
Right.
moved them to Fridays because
Yes.
of requests of the program saying that would sure make it easier for them.
Yep. The first face-to-face is scheduled for April 11th. Again, that's a 6-hour training. And again, once we have our training cohort set, we'll look at what locations make sense, and we can certainly discuss how to make that travel to that training less burdensome for people as well. Our second face-to-face, then, I've got it tentatively for July 8th. It could shift within that Summer Summit schedule. As we all know, that's always kind of fluid until it gets locked down. And then that coach's webinar, which is about a 45-minute webinar, sometime the end of July, beginning of August. Any other questions or concerns or comments from anyone?
Well, in that first face-to-face, we also talked about, depending on where the registrations come from, that there is a possibility that maybe it won't be a statewide, but maybe split it too.
Yeah, depending on how it plays out.
Yeah, so we do have flexibility in that. We're not, we don't have to do exactly as everyone else does. We can do how it's best for us.
No, this is our state training at this point. I mean, we're operating within the parameters of the training site that's been built for us. But as far as those face-to-face dates and schedules and things go, we can definitely be flexible. That's all I have. If nobody has any other questions, I won't keep you any longer. Please, though, if anything does come up where you think of a question that you should have asked or didn't ask, and you are wanting clarification, or you get into conversations with your teachers and you want further information, do not hesitate to reach out and ask. I'm always happy to help with those things. And I'm really looking forward to this. It's been a long time since I've gotten to train in South Dakota. And it's something that I love to do, so I'm looking forward to doing it with friends and colleagues closer to home.
Thanks, Becky.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Appreciate your time.
Yep, thanks, guys.